Hi, this is Ingvar, and without further ado, let's have a look at this amazing game.
So let's move on to the game. Smbat Lputian has the white pieces and Helgi Olafsson the black pieces. We have d4, knight f6, and the queen's Indian, which we know well from the Stockfish Alpha 0 match. g3 and bishop a6. It's more natural to put the bishop on b7, but the idea here is to lure a white piece away from control of d5, so queen c2. Now you see the idea with the queen controlling c4, it's harder to push d5. Although d5 can in some cases be played as a pawn sacrifice, like we saw in the Alpha 0 games. But Lputian went with bishop to g2, pn centers his bishop, pressure on d4 which white relieves, castles, white puts the rook on the half open file. We have castles, bishop f4, queen into b6, white plays b3, and now d5 on black. Black has got all his pieces out and should be close to equalizing here. White gets his last piece out with knight to c3, and now there's pressure on d5. How to solve that? Helgi goes with knight to b4. Queen goes to b2, and now d takes on c4. White doesn't recapture but goes for knight into e5, exposing this bishop and attacking the rook. Black replies by closing the diagonal here with the knight on d5. Knight a4 hitting the queen. Queen drops back. It's a bit tricky to put the queen in the line of fire of the bishop, but since well, that's a drunk bishop, isn't it? But since the bishop is attacked by our knight here, you don't really have to worry about that. So instead, white now finally takes on c4. B takes on c4. And if the knight moves, then we still have this attack on the rook. So rook b8, getting out of that diagonal and attacking the queen. So the queen moves, queen to c2. Knight takes on f4. And even though these pawns are doubled, this pawn helps white to control the important e5 square. But the knight stands well and can jump into c6 if the opportunity arises. And it did so after bishop to d6. White went with knight to c6. And now here is where the fireworks start. And what a show. Black decides to sacrifice the exchange. He goes for bishop takes f4. Now, surprisingly, white doesn't accept. Plays h3. But let's have a look and see what happens if he decides to take on b8. Then black already gets a second pawn here on h2 and has two pawns for the sacrificed exchange. And the white king is somewhat exposed here on the king side. We can assess that black has plenty of compensation for the sacrificed exchange, and he's even not done material since he already has two pawns. So instead, if we go back, Lputian decided to play pawn to h3. Yep, here, pawn to h3. And should we move the rook now? Well, if you move the rook, white's going to take here on c5. So Helgi didn't move the rook, he played bishop to b7. Now with this guy attacked, white is forced to accept the offer. Took the rook on b8. Now, if we take on b8, we have one last pawn then before as compensation, and that's probably not enough. But here Helgi uncorked An amazing move. I encourage you to take your time and try and figure out what black played here. Okay, black to move, played the double exclam. Bishop to e3. Caca! What a beauty. Okay, first off, so what happens if white takes on e3? F takes e3. Then we have queen to g3. The bishop on g2 is pinned. Bishop on b7 stands beautifully. The only way to prevent this really is to play rook to d5, but then we simply take the rook, and the knight on b8 is a sitting duck. It's toast. We're gonna take a next move and at least be up, you know, a couple of pawns with a better structure and the better pieces and the better king. So what happens if bishop takes b7? In that case, we're gonna give a check on g3, utilizing this brilliant pin that was made by bishop e3, the main idea of bishop e3. Bishop comes back to g2. Now we take on f2 check. Two options. If we go to f1, there's bishop e3, mate on f2 next move. Caca! If we go to Sakona, what do we play here? Knight g4, brilliant. Protecting h2, threatening mate. And if you take the knight, there's queen h4 check. You can only interpose, bishop h3, and I take it. Checkmate, Czechoslovakia. Peter check. Thank you, come again, no soup for you. So, what remains? Lputian played queen to b3. Potential double attack here with the queen. And now another brilliant move by Helgi. He played... What do you think he played? We got two pieces under attack. How to deal with them? Let's see a move he didn't play. Queen to g3. This looks consistent. But now we see the idea of queen to b3. There's queen takes b7. We're covering g2. And there's actually no way forward. If we try something similar like last time, we can actually go to f1 this time, because now the queen has been introduced and this is different than before. So this defends. So we can't play queen g3. What to do? Helgi, he must do something. And he found another brilliant move, knight to g4. Outstanding move. This protects this guy, but what happens if we take? Well, we're about to find out. First, let's see if we take this knight. H takes on g4. Now we can play queen g3. And with the h file open, it's a huge difference. In the variation before, we had the pawn on h3, but now if we take with the queen on f2 and the king moves, now it's checkmate because there's nothing on h3. In the variation without knight g4, there was nothing here. White can only interpose and checkmate. We can also go to h2, but in that case, bishop f4. This gets promptly mated on g3, and if you go to the corner again, there's check, check, and I mate you on f2. Beautiful stuff on the black squares. Black is completely dominating on the black squares. Let's go back. So knight g4, double exclam. So Lputian, he took on b7. And now queen h2 check, king to f1, and now knight to takes f2. More brilliant stuff. The idea is to move the knight again and then give checkmate on g1. White tries to bring reinforcements, queen to f3, but now there's knight takes d1 with a mate threat that we talked about on g1. So we don't have a lot of choices. Lputian ran with the king to e1. This gives us a few pieces to interpose. A check on the first rank. And now, this would have been a brilliant game, absolutely brilliant game. Black had found queen takes b8 here. And this is the simplest move to win, if we can talk about simple in such a position. Material is currently equal, except black is up 2 pawns. We can add to that white has a horrible structure, 4 isolated pawns all over the board, and he will have a losing position if black can save his pieces. So can we take on d1? Rook takes d1. In that case we play queen b4 check, then we take the knight on a4, and we're hitting the rook on d1. This gives us time to escape with the bishop on e3, and we're going to have a winning position. The other option is king takes d1. But here we can interpose the rook, not interpose, we can introduce it into the game, was what I meant to say. King e1, queen b4 check again. And now, not take on a4, but play bishop d4, attack the rook, and next move we take the knight. And this would have been a worthy finish to this brilliant game. Instead, we saw the move rook d8. And the idea is quite good. If the white were, for instance, to take on d1 now, let's have a look at that. Rook takes on d1. We're going to take, and this is amazing, being down 2 pieces, the white king is toast. Queen d6 check. The domination on the black squares is absolutely beautiful. King e1, check, checkmate. So you have to go in the other direction. King to c2. I'll give you a check here. If you go to b1, there's another quick mate. Queen c1 mate. And this is just, I mean, if you want a textbook example of domination on a color complex, this is it. King b3. Queen b4 check. Queen takes a4. And then we come back. Queen c1. Queen d1. We introduce the bishop. And then a little dance on the black squares. Beautiful. King b3, queen b2, king a4, and queen to b4 mate. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful stuff. So this was rook takes d1. The idea is also just to give mate. If we see a blank move like knight to c6, we see Helgi's idea was to play queen g1 check, interpose something, and bishop f2 mate. Again, a beautiful variation. So rook d8 actually wins, I think, against all moves except one. And unfortunately all this brilliance was stopped here by white, which is a shame. White found the great defensive move here. Can you find it? Defensive moves are also important. The previously considered out of this game, the knight on b8, it comes to d7. And yeah, this is a good move. The thing is, if we take the knight, which Helgi didn't do, and there's back rank mate. So great defensive resource. Another option, if we play queen g1, this is probably something black might have thought about here, and to take on f1 and take on d7. So Helgi would have to assess this endgame, which is, you probably can't lose, and maybe you should go for this. Rook d2 is to attack this, but also to threaten to take, so that white can't play e3 to defend the pawn. But this is okay. A little bit outside of the scope really. So knight d7. And perhaps missing his defense, Helgi became a little bit rattled. He played bishop f2. We saw king takes d1 from white. Queen g1 check. And now the attack has fizzled out, and the best that black can hope for here is a draw. White took on f2, and rook takes d7. Queen takes a2 was also an option, and perhaps he should have done that. Let's have a quick look. Probably he was afraid that after knight b2, rook takes d7, and queen takes c5, white has this strong passed pawn here. But nonetheless, black has 2 pawns as compensation for having a rook against 2 minor pieces. And probably black shouldn't lose this, especially with the white open, white king. Instead, he decided to not allow this passed c-pawn. He took on d7, but that allowed knight c3. And if you've seen my pattern recognition videos, one of the patterns we talked about was the knight defending the king, and the knight does an excellent job here. It's stopping all the checks. There's no check on a4 either, so it's hard for black actually to attack the king, but it does keep the c-pawn after rook d4. But now white's pieces are starting to coordinate. Black can probably still fight, and a draw would have been, I think, a just result out of this game. Although, you know, as a chess fan, I think we would all have liked to see black finish his attack. But white starts to activate his pieces now, and this queen is actually just out of play now because of the strong knight on c3. We have h6 from black to defend the back rank. Bishop e4, reintroducing the threat of the back rank. And here Helgi took on e4. He can still fight with f5, and materially is doing okay, but white's pieces are getting really active, and he must think about his king, and he has a bad queen here. But he took on e4, and now things start to go downhill. Probably he figured he had a perpetual here, but it turns out there simply isn't a perpetual. The king walks over to the king side. Queen to c1, king f2. Now f5 was played. Knight jumped into f6 with check. Knight d7, and you see that the knight is doing a good job of blockading the pawns. This e5 square is absolutely a monster square for the knight. So f4 from Helgi, queen d3, queen went to the corner, king g8, and now knight g4, defending the h2 square. And let's see the finish, because it's actually a little bit sad. h5, queen d8, king h7, queen to h4, pinning this pawn, queen to e4, and now the pawn starts dropping, and Helgi actually resigned here. Next move, I can take on c5, and there's no perpetual, the king is safe. So a bittersweet ending to an otherwise brilliant attack, and this would have been a worthy game to have on your resume. But such is chess, you know. You try sometimes, and sometimes you fail, but you know, it's better to try than to regret it. And a great game by Helgi nonetheless. And I'll probably show you another game that he played that had a better ending, and it's one of the most brilliant games I've ever seen. And I'm sure we will look at it on this channel, but for now, thanks for watching. Bye bye.